What's happening with Joel Embiid in Philadelphia is super interesting. And the weight of expectations in the load management age, as a guy's pretty firmly standing up for, man, my body keeps breaking. You keep seeing me play in the playoffs. I'm playing with masks. I've got vertigo. I can't see straight. Everything, I dunk and I collapse on the court. Like, there's only so much of my body I'm going to give to this regular season in a way that gets him investigated. That city is unfriendly. That city has no patience for there are now expectations around that basketball team that there haven't been since before Iverson. Iverson didn't come with these expectations.
No.
He got deeper, but nobody actually thought that any of Iverson's teams were going to end up winning the title, even as they played in the finals. What is expected of Joel Embiid, and it's the only way that the process can be successful, is if he is healthy and great. Otherwise, they will fail. Paul George returns tonight. The season has started as a disaster, Stugotz. He's shoved the columnist, and here he is, just saying flatly, and I've always admired the way that he is with the press. I've always admired that he doesn't mind being a villain. He speaks uncommonly candidly in front of microphones. And here he is telling Philadelphia, hey, I've given you too much of my body and soul to be treated this way.
I've broken my face twice. I came back early with the risk of losing my vision. Had broken fingers. I still came back. So I'm not gonna sit here and be like, when I see people saying he doesn't want to play, I've been way too much. I've done way too much, for this city, and putting myself at risk, for people to be saying that. So I do think it's bullshit. Like that dude, he's not here. Marcus, whatever his name is. I've done way too much for this city to be treated like this. So done way too much. But like I said, I wish I was as lucky as other ones, but that doesn't mean that I'm not trying and I'm not doing whatever it takes to be out there, which I'm gonna be here pretty soon.
Chris Cody accusing me of heavy breathing.
There was someone wheezing in there.
It was not me who was heavy breathing there.
We cut your mic down just because we thought it was you. We still heard it, so you're off the hook.
Well, that leaves me.
Yeah, but it didn't sound like you're wheezing.
Right.
It sounded like general media surrounding Joel Embiid. I think he's mentioning the same columnist that he got into a shoving match with in Marcus Hayes and Stugotz. I thought, and for those of you who do not have any context, he said, keep my brother's name out of your mouth and keep my son's name out of your mouth, because Marcus Hayes was talking about what Joel Embiid's legacy needs to be in Philadelphia, that he's got to play games in order to make that legacy happen, and that legacy is supposed to be a tribute to his late brother and his son. And by mentioning that, I thought it was fairly benign, but simply by tying that stuff together, an athlete who is under it in Philadelphia now shoves a columnist and makes matters all the worse.
It's getting to Joel Embiid, that city, that market, the way those fans respond to a guy who has done all of the things that he said for that city and for that fan base. But he hasn't won a title, and he hasn't played more than 70 games in a single season in his entire career. And I understand why Philadelphia fans, with so much expectations, with how great of a player he is when he's out there, and then you throw in he plays in the Olympics over the summer when he probably should have been resting because the Sixers should be more important in that city than winning a gold medal on a stacked team. And so I do understand why Philadelphia 76er fans and the media are a little bit fed up with Joel Embiid because he is such an amazing player. But he's never out there for 82 games. He's not. He's just not. Dan.
Well, the thing to me that is most interesting about this is a story that's been 10 years in the making.
Yes.
Philadelphia is a national and international laughingstock that had to have its power structure changed because they were losing on purpose to get a bunch of short-circuited dudes. It's not just Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz. It's Nerlens Noel, Okafor. They just lost on purpose for a decade, and this is the one thing that they still have from all of that, and it physically breaks in the postseason because of how much it's asked to carry, and then it emotionally breaks before the season because he can't get out on the court, and Philadelphia has now won one game, and he's pushing columnists and feuding with the fans. God almighty, this is going to be a season of difficult expectations for that team if they think that's how they're going to knock off the Celtics.
But when they get Embiid back, and George is playing tonight, as you pointed out, they're going to be very good in the East, aren't they? Like, if Embiid gives them 50 games and Paul George plays the rest of the season, those are big ifs, massive ifs. But if they do that, they'll contend in the East.
Decade into the project, and everything still hinges on Joel Embiid's health. And the injuries stack, and the ability to bounce back gets more difficult for him. The ability to stay healthy gets more difficult because of all the previous injuries, and the same exact thing applies to Paul George. Feels like it's built on a faulty premise.
Let me ask you guys, because I tie it to the Durant thing for a reason. Does it seem fun to you guys, Embiid and Durant, trying to be franchise faces? In Durant's case, he also gave his body at the end of a run and seemed to be having so little fun that he's like, bleep this. I don't even want to win the championships in 72 games a year. I'm out of here. I don't want to do this anymore. Does it seem to you that Joel Embiid feels appreciated when he's spitting into microphones? Hey, wait a minute. What do you mean I don't care?
No.
Like, do you see how often I play with my body not functioning correctly?
No, it doesn't when you hold up that example. It seems plenty fun when he's doing the Degeneration X crotch chop and being beloved by his city and being constantly in MVP conversations because he's a face of a franchise that hasn't gotten past the second round. I mean, yeah, in his low moments, it's like it's a human experience. I'm sure sometimes it's pretty great to be Kevin Durant because of all the great things he's done on the basketball court and because of all the adulation that he's met. I'm sure it's not great when he's deciding to fight with literally anybody on social media. It doesn't matter. You can be an egg. He will hop in your DMs and argue with you. That type of sensitivity doesn't seem super appealing to me, but there's good and bad with this.
But I think Kevin Durant, that's the example that would shed some light on what it is Joel Embiid is going through. Kevin Durant told you it was not fun being the face of the franchise.
Oh, but this is...
No, he left the franchise, and he was just another face in Golden State.
So this part, though, this part is interesting when we're talking about all-time greats and how it is organizations work in service of all-time greatness. Kevin Durant did play for a franchise that clearly is run well. Oklahoma City, on coupons, knows how to run a franchise successfully to get the pieces around Kevin Durant that once had around him, Westbrook and Harden, and continues to function over the entire century we're living in. Basically has OKC mattering.
Yes.
Because of what they've built in a place where it's impossible to keep free agents. They just basically game the system, so they sign guys long term.
They draft well. I mean, they do.
But so they draft well. Now look at what is left of the process and look at the level of mismanagement that you're talking in all of the things around Joel Embiid that led to the Colangelo family running it because they were tanking so explicitly to get to the point where Joel Embiid wouldn't be out there by himself. And now Paul George is coming as help in free agency, but that ain't process. That ain't we are going to lose for 10 years and have nothing to show for it. Nothing to show for Markelle Fultz and Ben Simmons from overall number one picks, franchise changers. They don't even play for us anymore. They're barely hanging on to the fringes of the league. Like, do you understand how poorly the whole thing has been built around him, as now they just sort of throw Daryl Morey into, get whoever you can in free agency.
I mean, I do understand. They did get Maxey, and that helps. He's a pretty good player. He's helping out.
Stugotz, it's 10 years of losing on purpose.
I know, Dan, but where they went wrong was well before Daryl Morey. It was taking Markelle Fultz when you could have taken Jason Tatum. Like, that is where the whole thing fell apart as far as I'm concerned. Because if you have Embiid and Tatum, you have multiple championships. You do. They took the wrong guy.
They built very poorly and have been mismanaged for a long time. And putting everything on the shoulders of Joel Embiid's health seems a risky way to knock out a Boston team that hasn't gotten any worse in the offseason.
But whose fault is that, though? Like, and why would you blame the fans or the media for criticizing Joel Embiid? It's all on his shoulders. I mean, doesn't he want that? He's a competitor. Doesn't he want it all on his shoulders?
I'm just saying it's
why
hard.
Would, like,
I'm
why?
not saying.
No,
I'm just saying it must be unpleasant.
Life is hard, man.
Yeah, it's unpleasant. These are unique problems that come with the fame. I don't understand getting physical, but I do kind of understand invoking his son and his brother who passed away. It felt gratuitous. It also, I wasn't even aware that Joel Embiid had those issues going around him, and I'm not sure that's the forum for me to learn that he has those things going on. So I totally get why there might be an understanding within those in that media. When Jimmy Butler was going through his stuff with his dad, it was understood within media that this was going on, and that is not a line that you cross. So I understand why Joel Embiid is really upset by this, considering that there's a lot of people that cover that organization that probably knew that and understood that that was a third-rail discussion.
The Joel Embiid story, what is it that you think is interesting or funny or not funny about that story, Jamel?
Well, here's what I'll get to the part that is funny. The funny part is that I don't know if you had this thought, Dan, but it made me really wistful, because I remember when I was in the thick of it, when I was in the trenches, going to games, being in locker rooms, covering teams. These kind of confrontations happen. Now, maybe they didn't always result in shoving. Sometimes there was yelling, there was cursing, but it just kind of reminded me of the good old days, is when you wrote something that probably crossed the line, or you just wrote something that you had to defend, and then you showed up in the locker room the next day, and then you just had to wait and see if all hell broke loose. I was like, damn, I kind of miss getting cussed out by a coach or athlete every now and again.
The column's still mattering. Marcus Hayes, this is what he wrote, over the line or not. Quote, Joel often says that he wants to be great, to leave a legacy for the boy named after his little brother, who tragically died in an automobile accident when Embiid was in his first year as a 76er. Well, in order to be great at your job, you first have to show up to work. Embiid has been great as just the opposite. Your thoughts there?
Totally over the line. I read the column, and then I reread it and I took that part out of it, and I just sort of mentally, I read it without reading that paragraph, and the column's still effective. The column still works. He still gets the same point across, that he feels like Joel Embiid has not lived up to his end of the bargain in terms of staying in shape, being in good condition, being ready for the start of the season. Those are all fair criticisms. But the moment that you start bringing in somebody's children, somebody's family, and certainly a relative that is deceased, that the subject is close, that is close to, you are asking for the confrontation that you got. I mean, Dan, you know that there are unspoken rules to this, and I think maybe those rules, they don't exist anymore because of the sort of the type of media consumption society that we have become. But you just don't really touch family, not in this way. And especially, I found the whole correlation, and let's just say that people think that this is totally fair. What is the correlation between his child and his work and his late brother? I don't understand how all of those things mix together. So I thought that part of the column was totally out of bounds, and Joel Embiid had a right to be upset about the mention of them.
Can you walk us through, because at any point in our history, what you're saying journalistically is so, but I've changed the line for where it is that this stuff now lands. Newspapers have a standard, and you're saying that's too much, but that's not even mostly how any of this is consumed anymore. And fans and media do feel entitled to whatever the facts are on however it is they can criticize or bury you. So you're applying what have been old-fashioned sensitivities, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, I feel like all that stuff has been toppled now. We're not living in that world anymore.
Oh, no, Dan, you're right. I mean, there is a difference between how I want things to be and maybe my own personal code versus what they actually are. There's a very different realities there. I realize that I'm existing in the reality that is no longer the reality. Because even when I was on television, not that I'm not on television, but when we were at ESPN, I had a certain code that I lived by whenever I was on TV. I will not say anything about an athlete that I could not say to their face. That was it. To me, that is what kept me in check. That is what kept me from getting a little too comfortable in that seat in the studio, knowing I ain't got to go in that locker room anymore. But I realize that now in today's world of journalism, loosely journalism adjacent, is that you don't have to worry about that anymore. Much like we grew up in a time where if you got something wrong, you felt a level of shame. That shame doesn't exist anymore. So I understand what you're saying in that for a lot of people, this is totally within bounds. And even to some sports fans, they think this is within bounds because they're looking at Joel Embiid's performance, his underperformance at the start of this season. They're paying him a lot of money. And we know that as the money has risen and as the stakes have gotten higher and as people have felt more entitled to sort of access to athletes and more entitled to share their opinions about them, that there's going to be an audience for this of people who feel like this is right and just. And you can take these kind of shots at athletes because look at the money they're making. And yes, we have a right to criticize them in whatever way we see fit. I just personally do not exist in that world.
Jamel, has anyone ever confronted you over something you wrote?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like I remember the last memorable confrontation that I can recall was when I was on the beat. I was covering Michigan State basketball, and there was a rumor that Tom Izzo had put his hands on one of his players, and this is back in the day. I guess the message board used to be sort of our it was sort of our version of what Twitter has become in many ways. Like on the message boards, there'd be all kind of rumors about recruits, players who saw them here, coaches, this kind of thing. But this particular rumor, it had happened after Michigan State. They had gone to Michigan. They had beat Michigan down at Michigan, and supposedly there was this rumor that Izzo was really upset with one of his players, and on the bus ride back to East Lansing and Ann Arbor are only like 45 minutes apart. That supposedly him and this player, got into a back and forth. There may have been a physical confrontation involved. And it was, for as much as something could be viral and could be everywhere, it was sort of everywhere. And so I asked Tom Izzo about it. And I think I asked the player about it, and they both said, no, that is not what happened. So that's what I wrote. I wrote, hey, despite this rumor, this didn't happen. And Tom Izzo was livid with me. And he was livid with me because he thought that I gave something that he didn't feel like was a legitimate rumor or a legitimate story I should be chasing. He thought I gave him more credibility because even his denial, he said, would lead to his adversaries in recruiting using that as a way to recruit against him. Now, this version of Izzo that we see now is a lot more mellower in terms of his sideline sort of behavior. But then Tom Izzo was known to break some clipboards. He was known to get a little feisty. He was known to be, at times either excitedly or maybe even critically in a player's face. So the idea that Tom Izzo would be accused of this is not necessarily surprising. And so he thought that I gave some legitimacy to some bull. And so he pulled me aside after his weekly press conference, and he and I went at it in the hallway. And, he was probably mad at me for a couple weeks, and then we were fine.